Baltic Sea sits surrounded by 9 countries and thousands of ships, yet large parts of its floor remain less mapped than parts of the moon. Divers who try to explore it often turn back within minutes. Then researchers studying old shipping records, not treasure hunters, started tracing routes nobody had checked in decades. What they found on the seafloor was never supposed to still be there. The sea that acts like neither a lake nor an ocean. The Baltic Sea is almost completely closed in, connected to the North Sea only through a narrow set of straits between Denmark and Sweden. Because of this, ocean water barely mixes in, and the Baltic ends up brackish, a mix of salt and fresh water that is far less salty than a normal sea. This single detail changes almost everything about what can live, sink, or survive down there. The average depth across the entire Baltic is only about 55 meters, or roughly 171 feet, shallow enough that a fishing trawler can snag something on the bottom almost anywhere it drops a net. The deepest point, called the Landsort Deep near Sweden, drops to around 459 meters, but pockets like that are rare exceptions in an otherwise shallow basin. Millions of people live along its coastline, and thousands of ships cross it every single year. That combination, shallow water, heavy traffic, and almost no flushing from the open ocean, turned this sea into the perfect place for 2 different kinds of buried history. One came from WOW, the other came from everyday life on land, and both are still sitting on the bottom today. The weapons everyone agreed to forget about. After World War II ended, the Allied powers faced a problem. Germany had produced roughly 65,000 tons of chemical warfare agents during the war, mustard gas among the most common of them, and somebody had to get rid of all of it fast. The chosen solution was simple and, at the time, considered harmless. Load it onto ships and dump it into the sea. Researchers now estimate that around 40,000 tons of chemical munitions were sunk into the Baltic in the years right after the war, concentrated mainly near the Danish island of Bornholm and in the deep water south of the Swedish island of Gotland. Some of it was dumped carefully in marked zones. A large amount was reportedly thrown overboard directly from the decks of ships too, scattering shells and canisters along entire transport routes instead of one clean pile. Fishermen have been paying the price for this decision for decades. Danish records alone list hundreds of incidents since the 1980s where trawlers pulled up corroded shells, and dozens of fishermen have suffered serious chemical burns from mustard gas that leaked out on contact. The material does not simply dissolve and disappear the way people once assumed. That assumption is exactly what turned this into a much bigger problem than anyone originally planned for. The gas that still burns decades later. Scientists who study these dump sites have learned that different chemical agents behave in very different ways underwater. Some substances, like the nerve agent tabun, break down fairly quickly once they hit seawater. Mustard gas does not. In cold Baltic water, it can thicken and form a hard outer crust, sealing itself into solid lumps that can sit on the seafloor for decades without fully breaking down. Military history researchers studying the region have documented cases where lumps of this material washed ashore or turned up in fishing nets fully intact, sometimes injuring the people who touched them. In one case near the Lithuanian coast, a canister marked with the German word for mustard gas was found on a public beach, forcing an emergency evacuation before anyone was seriously hurt. Highly flammable phosphorus from old incendiary weapons has also occasionally appeared on Baltic beaches, capable of burning skin the moment it dries out in open air. Recent scientific studies analyzing sediment near Bornholm and Gotland have confirmed that toxic byproducts from these weapons, including arsenic compounds, are still detectable in the mud and in nearby fish and shellfish tissue. The chemicals are not gone. They are simply changing form while they sit there. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this breakdown, consider subscribing. It really helps this channel keep going. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Chemical weapons were only one category of danger left behind after the war. A far larger amount of ordinary military hardware went into this same sea, and most of it never got tracked at all. The mines that still wait on the bottom. Alongside the chemical weapons, researchers estimate roughly 500,000 tons of conventional munitions were also dumped into the Baltic Sea, including naval mines, torpedo heads, aircraft bombs, and artillery shells left over from both World War I and World War II. Unlike the chemical dump sites, which were at least loosely mapped on nautical charts, much of this conventional material was scattered without any clear record of where it actually landed. Naval mines are a particular concern because many were designed to remain dangerous for decades, and corroded casings can still detonate if disturbed by fishing gear, anchors, or construction equipment. Clearance teams from multiple countries continue running operations across the Baltic every year, and modern offshore projects like wind farms and new pipelines routinely have to pause construction after unexploded ordnance turns up during seabed surveys. 16 separate zones along the German coastline alone are still marked on shipping charts as contaminated by munitions. Combined with the unknown chemical dump sites nearby, this turned entire stretches of relatively shallow, easily reachable seafloor into places most divers, fishermen, and engineers simply choose to avoid rather than risk finding out what is buried there. Old weapons were not the only thing slowly draining the life out of this sea. A second, entirely different threat has been building for decades, and it has nothing to do with anything anyone deliberately dumped. The zone where nothing can survive. Sitting in the middle of the Baltic Sea is what scientists now call the largest human-caused dead zone on Earth, an oxygen-starved stretch of seafloor covering somewhere between 60,000 and 70,000 square kilometers, an area larger than the entire country of Ireland. In these zones, oxygen levels drop so low that most bottom-dwelling life simply cannot survive there anymore. The cause traces back to decades of fertilizer runoff, sewage, and other nutrient pollution flowing into the sea from farms and cities across 9 different countries. These nutrients feed massive algae blooms near the surface, and when that algae dies and sinks, it gets broken down by bacteria in a process that consumes huge amounts of oxygen from the water below. Because the Baltic barely exchanges water with the open ocean, that oxygen almost never gets replenished. Since the 1950s, the volume of Baltic water affected by this kind of oxygen loss has increased by roughly 10 times. Sediment samples taken from these dead zones show something researchers describe as unsettling in its own quiet way. The layers are perfectly smooth and undisturbed, with no signs of burrowing creatures at all, because nothing capable of burrowing has been able to live down there for years. A sea with almost no oxygen in some places and buried weapons in others sounds like it should have destroyed everything sitting on its floor by now. Instead, something else happened to one very specific category of object down there, and it is the opposite of destruction. The ship's time forgot to destroy. Under normal ocean conditions, a wooden shipwreck rarely lasts longer than a century before it is eaten apart by a creature called the shipworm, a small saltwater mollusk that bores directly into submerged wood and consumes it from the inside out. The Baltic Sea's low salt content makes it nearly impossible for shipworms to survive in most of its waters, especially in the colder northern basins. Combined with cold temperatures, near total darkness, and very low oxygen levels at depth, this has turned parts of the Baltic seafloor into one of the best wood-preserving environments on the planet. Divers and researchers have documented wooden warships and merchant vessels from the 1600s and 1700s still standing upright with masts, rigging, and carved decorations intact, looking close to how they appeared the day they sank. Experts studying the region estimate the Baltic may hold around 100,000 well-preserved shipwrecks in total, and new ones are still being found every year. That same protection is now starting to fail in places. Since around 1990, warmer water temperatures have allowed shipworms to expand into parts of the southern Baltic where they were never able to survive before, already damaging around 100 wrecks dating back to the 1200s. Researchers are now racing to document and protect what remains before that changes permanently. Wrecks were not the strangest things sonar equipment picked up on the Baltic floor. One scan in 2011 found something that made even trained researchers pause before offering an explanation. The shape that shouldn't have been there. In June of 2011, a Swedish exploration group called Ocean X was returning home after 9 unsuccessful days searching for shipwrecks when their sonar equipment picked up something strange resting on the seafloor of the northern Baltic between Sweden and Finland at a depth of roughly 85 meters. The image showed a rough circular shape, close to 60 meters wide, with edges and patterns that looked far more geometric than most natural rock formations. The find, now known as the Baltic Sea anomaly, quickly spread through international media, with speculation ranging from a sunken aircraft to something built long before recorded history. Geologists from Stockholm University who examined rock samples brought back from the site identified common minerals that form naturally through ordinary seabed chemistry and pointed to the fact that glaciers scraped across this entire region thousands of years ago, leaving behind unusual boulders, ridges, and circular deposits scattered across the Baltic floor. Most scientists who reviewed the case landed on the same conclusion. The formation is most likely a natural glacial feature, shaped by the same Ice Age forces responsible for countless other odd rock formations across northern Europe. No follow-up expedition has produced evidence strong enough to overturn that explanation, though the depth and remote location have made repeat visits difficult and expensive. Strange shapes on sonar screens turned out to be far less disruptive than something that happened to actual infrastructure sitting on that same seafloor just over a decade later. The pipeline that went silent overnight. In September of 2022, a series of underwater explosions tore through the Nord Stream. 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, 2 major gas lines running along the Baltic Sea floor between Russia and Germany, near the Danish island of Bornholm. Seismic monitoring stations in Sweden and Denmark picked up the blasts immediately, and investigators later found craters on the seabed and residue consistent with military-grade explosives at the scene. Authorities in multiple countries opened sabotage investigations, and evidence has pointed toward the use of divers or underwater equipment capable of placing charges at a depth of around 80 meters. Responsibility for the attack remains disputed. Some investigations and reports have focused on individuals connected to Ukraine, while Russian officials have blamed Western nations, and no government has issued a fully confirmed public conclusion naming who ordered it. What is not disputed is the scale of what happened underwater that night. Roughly 500 million cubic meters of natural gas escaped into the sea and atmosphere, one of the largest single releases of its kind ever recorded. The incident proved that even heavily monitored modern infrastructure sitting on the Baltic floor could be reached and destroyed without anyone noticing until it was already too late. Between old chemical weapons, buried mines, a permanent dead zone, unstable geology, and an unresolved attack on live energy infrastructure, the reasons to stay away from parts of this seafloor keep stacking on top of each other. What it all adds up to, none of this means the Baltic Sea is unusually cursed or beyond understanding. What the evidence shows is a shallow, nearly closed sea that absorbed decades of buried chemical weapons and conventional ordnance, decades of nutrient pollution that starved large sections of its floor of oxygen, and a set of natural conditions strange enough to both perfectly preserve centuries-old shipwrecks and fuel decades of speculation over a single sonar image. Real sabotage on real pipelines only added one more reason for caution in recent years. The Baltic Sea earned its reputation as calm and familiar because most people only ever see its surface. Everything sitting beneath that surface tells a far more complicated story, one built from war, pollution, geology, and a handful of mysteries science has only partly solved. If this video gave you something, subscribing takes 3 seconds and it helps us keep making content like this.